You now understand the standard. You know what the clauses require. You know what the controls in Annex A look like. The question that every implementation team arrives at eventually is, where do we actually start? And that question deserves a real answer, not it depends on your organization, but an actual sequence of activities, a practical roadmap, and a realistic sense of what each phase involves. In this episode, we are building your ISO 42001 implementation roadmap. From pre-implementation assessment through to performance measurement and continuous improvement. This is the episode that turns knowledge into action. Let's get started. ISO 42001 implementation is a project. And like any project, it benefits from a clear phase structure, defined milestones, resource allocation, and governance. I use a four-phase approach with clients: assess, plan, execute, and certify. Each phase has defined deliverables that gate progression to the next phase. The timeline varies significantly by organization. A small technology company with a limited AI footprint and an existing ISO 27001 system might achieve readiness for certification in 6 to 9 months. A large enterprise deploying AI across multiple business lines, regulatory jurisdictions, and a complex vendor ecosystem might take 12 to 18 months. The honest answer to how long will this take is it depends on your current maturity, your scope, and your resources. But you should plan for at least a year from initiation to certification if you are starting from a low maturity baseline. What I want you to resist is the temptation to rush the assessment phase in order to start building controls. The gap analysis is where you learn what you actually need to build, and skipping or shortcutting it means you end up building in the wrong places. Invest time in assessment. It pays dividends throughout every subsequent phase. The gap analysis is your map before you start the journey. It compares your current state of AI governance against every requirement of ISO 42001, clause by clause, control by control, and identifies what you have, what you are missing, and what needs to be enhanced. Current state analysis starts with your AI system inventory. If you do not know what AI systems you are running, you cannot assess how well they are governed. Use the inventory process we discussed in episode 5. Go department by department, include shadow AI, and categorize what you find. Then, for each system and each AIMS requirement, assess: do we have a control? Is it documented? Is it effective? Are we retaining evidence? The organizational readiness assessment adds a dimension that pure gap analysis often misses: culture and leadership. Do senior leaders understand AI governance well enough to sponsor the aims effectively? Is there organizational resistance, AI teams who view governance as an obstacle? Is there adequate budget? Are the right skills available, or do you need to bring them in? Readiness gaps are often more significant barriers to implementation success than technical gaps. Address them in your planning phase. Your gap analysis produces a prioritized remediation list. Phase 2 turns that list into a plan. The implementation roadmap is a project plan with work streams, milestones, owners, and dependencies. The work streams I typically use are governance and documentation, risk and impact assessment, control implementation, training and awareness, technology infrastructure, and audit readiness. The phase gate approach means no workstream moves forward without completing defined prerequisites. You do not deploy Annex A controls before you have a documented risk assessment that tells you which controls are needed and why. You do not run your internal audit before controls are implemented and have been operating for at least a few months. Gates prevent the common failure of building controls that are not connected to a risk rationale and cannot be demonstrated to be effective. Resource planning needs to be explicit and realistic. Who is responsible for each workstream? What percentage of their time is allocated? If your ISO 42001 implementation is being managed by someone who has a full-time job plus governance responsibilities, you are under-resourced. Name it, fix it before you start. The most common cause of implementation delays is not technical complexity, it is insufficient resource allocation. Let me spend a moment on change management because it is consistently the most underinvested element of ISO 42001 implementations and consistently one of the most significant causes of implementation failure. ISO 42001 is not just a documentation exercise. It changes how people work. It requires development teams to complete documentation before deployment. It requires business users to seek approval before adopting new AI tools. It requires management to engage with AI governance as a board-level topic. All of that is change. Identify your change agents early. Who in the organization genuinely believes in AI governance? Those people become your internal champions, the ones who normalize governance behaviors in their teams and push back on governance shortcuts. Build them into your implementation plan explicitly. Address resistance at its source. The most common form of resistance I encounter is the "this is just bureaucracy" objection from technical teams. Counter it with specifics. Here is an AI incident that happened in the industry because this control was absent. Here is the regulatory enforcement action that this control prevents. Connect governance requirements to real-world consequences. Abstract compliance requirements generate resentment. Concrete harm prevention stories generate buy-in. Documentation is the evidence base of your aims. Every ISO 42001 requirement has associated documentation, either mandatory documents that the standard explicitly requires, or records that demonstrate your processes are operating as documented. Get your documentation right, and your audit will be straightforward. Get it wrong, and every audit interaction becomes a defensive conversation. The mandatory documents under ISO 42001 include the scope statement, the AI policy, the risk assessment and risk register, the statement of applicability, the AI objectives, and the AI system inventory. The mandatory records include training records, impact assessment reports, audit reports, management review minutes, incident records, and corrective action records. Beyond the mandatory items, your procedures, work instructions, and process documentation form the operational backbone of your aims. These documents describe how the controls work in practice. The golden rule of aims documentation is document what you actually do, not what you ideally do. An auditor who interviews your staff and finds that they do something different from your documented procedures has found a non-conformity, even if what the staff are doing is better than what the document says. With documentation developed, you execute the control implementation in risk priority order. High-risk areas first, the AI systems with the highest potential impact, the data governance controls for your most sensitive data, the oversight mechanisms for your most autonomous AI deployments. Integration with existing systems is an opportunity that many implementations miss. Your ISO 42001 risk assessment process should integrate with your enterprise risk management framework, not operate as a separate silo. Your AI system change management process should integrate with your IT change management process, not create a parallel workflow. Your AI incident management should integrate with your information security incident management. Integration reduces duplication, reduces confusion, and makes governance feel like a coherent system rather than a collection of independent requirements. Technology infrastructure for AI governance is a genuine investment, and it matters for implementation success. AI governance platforms that centralize risk registers, control evidence, audit schedules, and monitoring dashboards dramatically reduce the administrative burden of AIMS maintenance. Monitoring systems that automate KPI tracking and alert generation reduce the resource cost of ongoing oversight. Evaluate your technology needs during the planning phase and factor the procurement and deployment timeline into your roadmap. Before you go live with your aims, and certainly before you present it to an internal auditor or certification body, you need to demonstrate that it is working. Performance measurement is how you make that demonstration. Your KPI framework should be live before your controls are fully deployed. The sequence matters. Define the metrics, build the monitoring mechanism, establish the baseline, then deploy the control and observe performance against baseline. This gives you a before and after picture that tells a governance story, not just a compliance status report. Regular performance reviews at the operational level, weekly for KPIs, monthly for governance performance reporting, create the cadence that keeps your aims active between formal audits. The biggest risk to a newly implemented aims is that governance attention dissipates after the initial deployment effort. Regular reviews maintain attention. They surface emerging issues before they become incidents, and they produce the documentation trail that demonstrates your aims is continuously operating, which is exactly what certification auditors are looking for. ISO 42001 Clause 10 requires continual improvement, and this is not satisfied by completing your implementation. It is a permanent operating requirement. The improvement cycle has 4 inputs: non-conformities and corrective actions, internal audit findings, management review outputs, and lessons learned from incidents. Each input feeds into an improvement process. Identify the gap or opportunity, analyze the root cause, design and implement an improvement, verify that the improvement is effective, and document the cycle. The documentation is critical because an auditor assessing your continual improvement program needs to see evidence that the cycle is actually operating, not just described in a procedure. Over time, a maturing aims moves from compliance-focused, are we meeting the standards requirements, to value-focused, are we reducing AI risk, building stakeholder trust, and making better AI governance decisions. That maturity journey is the real prize of ISO 42001 implementation. The certification is evidence of where you are. The ongoing improvement cycle is what determines where you go.